The next script and dataset we are going to look at, I would say, was probably the most difficult one out of all the datasets I had to create. I've never done any type of web scraping using Python, so everything that you see here is all new to me, and I had to create by researching or finding out what each function do or how can I get my desired results. So the next project that I build out that has to relate to web scraping using Python again, the second time around should be a lot easier, or if not, I could just refer back to the scripts I have here. This script is called Final News Scrape, and the goal of this script was to pull the headline, pull the link to the article, and pull the date the article was published coming from the Google News website for each stock symbol in the file we loaded in, which is called stock, which is basically our stock symbol name file. So this is the website we are going to pull the headline, the link to the article, and the date the article was published. And we need to do this for every stock symbol in our original file that we loaded in. This is the best place to pull those articles because the Google News aggregates different sources together and outputs them as one for whatever news you search for. So in our case, we looked up WBA stock, and you can see that there's different publishers. You have Simple Wall Street, then you have Yahoo Finance, then Seeking Alpha. This is good because we'll have a wide range of publishers and articles coming from different websites. But like I said earlier, we need to create a script that will automatically search this link or search the Google News and grab all those headlines for every stock symbol that we have in our file. Let's get back to the coding so I can explain to you what I've created. Let's start with the first text box. So the first three libraries and packages we are importing are the first ever time I've used those libraries and packages. But importing pandas and NumPy, I've used them plenty times before, and we already seen pandas used in one of our previous datasets. So with the first library and package we are importing, we are going to use urllib.request importing URL open as urec. From my knowledge, what this will do is that it will open any URL link within Python. The next line from BS4 import beautiful soup as soup. This basically will help us scrape data from the web. So whatever link we have, we'll be able to pull information from that website or link we are currently using. Next, we will import request as R. This is basically going to help us make HTTP requests in Python. The main thing in our case is to inspect data from our web link. Then finally, we are going to import pandas and NumPy. This is mainly for data manipulation, and as you've seen before with pandas, we are going to be creating another data frame. Alright, so with that out of the way, we can move on to the second box of coding, and it's basically what we've seen before in our last script. So we have the variable called stock, and it's going to read in our stock underscore symbol underscore name file. This file, of course, contains all our stock symbols and the company name behind it. So let's get on to the more interesting part. So in our third block of coding, the first thing that we do is that we create a variable called I, and we set it equal to 0. The reason for this is that I only want to look at the first 5 headlines that the Google News webpage returned for each stock symbol. Once we have 5 headlines for the stock symbol, I then want this script to move on to the next stock symbol and repeat the process again. In the second line, we have, of course, our empty data frame. Think of the variable b as a tray, and we are going to be adding things on top of that tray within our loop. So on to the next line of coding, and you can see here we are going to begin our loop. So for symbols in stock underscore symbol, we are going to perform these steps. And with the third line of coding, we've seen what that looks like already. We're basically saying for each stock symbol in the file that we loaded in, perform these steps. So beginning of the loop, we are going to create a variable called URL, and this is going to hold our template link to search for different stock symbols. So with this link, I've modified it slightly so that the current stock symbol it's on, the link will know to look for that stock symbol news or any news that came out for that stock symbol. There's a part in the link where you're able to search for anything on the Google News webpage without even going to that webpage directly. You could type it in and it'll take you to what you search for. The part where you see Q equals symbols plus stock, that is where we modify the link. So basically what the Q is, from what I believe, basically means query. So what are we searching for with this web link? So with this modified link, the current stock symbol that the loop is on will search for stock news for that specific stock symbol. Let's take an example. Let's do an example. Replace symbols with WBA, and that's basically all these symbols is doing in this script. Because we have this in a loop, we don't need to manually search each stock symbol news. Alright, so hopefully that clears things up and we can move on to the next line of code. For the next couple lines of codes, we are going to open the web link, read it, and then close it. For uClient equal urec parentheses URL, that is basically the URL link we are requesting to see or requesting to get data from. The next line, HTML equals uClient.read, we are basically reading the data from that web page. And then uClient.close should mean that we are closing that web page. The next thing we are going to do in our loop is that we are going to parse that HTML web page that we searched for earlier. We are going to use a HTML parser to grab all our data, or to search for all our data as well. So now that we have parsed our page, we are going to look for key information to get our desired results. That's basically the headline, the web page link, and the date the article was published. So let's start with the table variable. So what the table variable is going to do, it's going to find within our web page all the H3 tags. Next, we are going to look for an attribute called class, and it has to be equal to this string of text that you see here on the screen for H3 class. The string of text that you see here is basically our attribute value, and this is the headline coming from that web page. Alright, for the next line where we create the variable called table2, this time we are going to be taking a look at the A tag with the attribute called class, and then the attribute value of the string that you see here on the screen, which is VDXFZ. This basically holds our article link, and we are going to use that later on in our loop, in another loop, to grab the link from that tag. For the next variable called table3, we are going to look at the tag called time, the attribute of class, and the attribute value of the string of text that you see on the screen, WW6DFF, and so on. This is going to give us when the article was published. Alright, so for those 3 lines of coding that I just went over, it is going to try and find all those tags, class, and those attribute values where they have a match. And then it's going to hold it in its respective variable. Alright, before I move on any further, I want to show you what the data in those table variables look like. So you can see here highlighted in the red box is what a similar example to what our table variables data will hold. Very messy, and we don't need all that information. We only need to get the headline, the article link, and the date it was published. And you can see below on that next line of code that with a simple text function, we are able to grab only the headline from that web page. But this example was more so to show you how our data looks like in those table variables. So it's very messy, and we have to do a bit of data manipulation or data cleaning to get our desired results. All right, so we have a nested loop now that we are going to explain. So the first thing we have is while I is less than 5, we are going to perform these steps. And by the way, the reason that we have I less than 5 is because I want to look at the 5 most recent headlines from the current stock symbol. How the Google News webpage have their search engine set up, you see the most recent articles published first. So every day when we run this program or script, we are always going to get the most recent results if there were any published for that stock symbol. So we can move on to the next line of code. So we have a variable called headline, and it's equal to table with the index of I, and we are going to retrieve only the text. If you remember, we set I equal to 0. So this is the first instance of this loop running. So we are going to select the first headline we see. Once we have that, we move on to the next line of coding where we have another variable called link. And this is going to look for table 2 for the index of I, which is 0 in this case right now. And we are going to use the get method to find the attribute of href, and that is going to return our article link. So when we click on it, it'll take us directly to that web page. Then we will create another variable called date, which looks at table 3 with the index of 0 in our case, or the index of I, and it's going to use the get method again to return the date the article was published. Now that we have our variables set up, we could create our data frame. This is another data frame that we are creating, and the index for it will be the symbols or the stock symbols. We then are going to create our columns for the data frame we just created and set them equal to the variables we just created previously as well. So in the first line where you see a stock underscore symbols, we set that equal to the current stock symbol that we are currently on. For the next one, for headline, we are going to set that one equal to headline. And then for link, we set that equal to a link template and then plus the link from our variable from earlier. When we had used the get method to pull our link, the link on the Google News page doesn't include the full link. So this template here, when combined with the link variable, will take us directly to that article web page. And then lastly, we have a column called publish, and we are going to set this equal to the date. So this is the date when the article was published. Once all of this information has been stored in our A data frame, we are then going to append it to our B data frame. So where this information is continuously updated. And all of this represents one row of data. So that's why in the next line where we have I equal I plus 1, we are going to move on to the next index or the next I. It's then going to repeat the same process for the current stock symbol until it reaches I equal 5. Once I equal 5, we are then going to reset I back to 0. So that is why you see I equals 0. And then we are going to break that nested loop and start the process again until all stock symbols in our original file that we read in have been completed. And lastly, we have a print statement that tells me which stock symbols have been completed. Because we are using internet connection for this script, this program takes a little while to run. It takes around 30 to 45 minutes to run, depending on how many stock symbols we have and our internet connection speed. This is why I added that print statement, because if I don't have that visual cue telling me where the script is at, I won't know how close we are to completing this program. And this is very important because the tables have to update in our database, which we will cover later. But if this program isn't done running by the time the database updates, then we won't have the newly updated information. Alright, once our loop is done, I'm then going to do a bit of data manipulation. So the first thing that you see here, and ignore the warning, I was running the program earlier and I just had to interrupt it because it takes a little while to run. So the program runs, I just had to stop it from running because I was going to look at something else. So with this next block of coding where you see b published equal pd 2 underscore date time, we are going to convert that published column to a data type of date time. And then in the next line of coding, we are still going to continue to work on the published column, but we are only going to retrieve the date for it. This is because when we converted it to date time, the column includes the date and the time. I only want to look at the date for the article link, and so that's why we converted it. So that's why we only pull dt.date. This will return only the date value for that specific article. And then lastly, we are going to export that data frame to a CSV file at this file location path. And the file will be named stock_news.csv. So now I'm going to show you what the dataset looks like. This is not the final dataset. We still have a bit more work to do for this dataset, and we're going to cover that in a later video or later down the road. Alright, so you can see that we have our index column, then we have our stock symbol column, the headline for the article, we then have the link and the date it was published. Now in Excel, you could click the link and it'll take you directly to the web page. But this is not the final version of the data set. Like I said earlier, there's one thing I need to remove, and that will be the index column. And quickly, I could show you what the final data set for the stock_news looks like. So in the end, the file gets renamed to stock news, and the format of the file is changed to Microsoft Excel 97 to 2003. This is a automatic data cleaning process. So whenever the macros VBA file, which cleans all my data sets, is open, all of the data sets are updated, cleaned, and can be used to update the database. So as you can see here, the index column has been removed. We still have the stock symbol, the headline, the link, and the date the article was published. And as I was mentioned earlier, if you click on the link value, it'll take you directly to the web page. But in Excel, you gotta click inside of the cell, then outside, then back in, and then it'll recognize it as a hyperlink. But in our Power BI report, we don't need to do this. We just click the headline and it'll take us to that article link. So you can see I clicked the link and it's taken us to our article link. It's opening the web page, and the article comes from the website called marketbeat.com.